Hello and welcome. You're watching the Tov Jewish News Channel. My name is Michael Vילנסקי, and my guest today is Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen. Rabbi, great to have you.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So, Rabbi, we've seen many civilizations throughout the world's history, but none have been as successful as the West. So, my question to you, as you know, you are a man of Jewish faith, from Judaism standpoint, what makes the West so successful? Is it something in the West doctrine, in the West philosophical doctrine, or is it something else?
Okay, that's a big question. First of all, I would just like to say that when we say from Judaism's perspective, we're already limiting our own identity to that of a religious identity, which I think is problematic, especially when dealing with a question like this one. I think the people of Israel really predate the social constructs of religion and race and nationalism and all these things. We were a big civilization with a spiritual component and a legal component and a national component and a territorial component and a spiritual component. And when the Romans destroyed us, we went into exile, we went into galut, and at a certain point in history, we started to limit our self-definition to that of a religion, and that's where the word Judaism kind of popped up. But I think to answer your question in terms of like what's the Jewish view of Western civilization and why it's successful, I think we really need to understand that our civilization has its own ideological paradigm and has its own historiography. And I think the real answer to why was the West successful from a Jewish perspective is that the Jewish people went into galut. Meaning when when our ancestress Rivka was pregnant with twins, Esav and Yaakov, she had a prophecy that these two twins represent two different civilizations. And when one is strong, the other is weak. And when one is weak, the other is strong. And when the Roman Empire destroyed our civilization, destroyed our national framework, destroyed Jerusalem, and cast us into exile, that's when the West began its historic climb. That's when the West became dominant in the world. You could say the Roman Empire morphed into the Christian church. The Christian church dominated much of Europe, feudalist Europe. Then, feudalism kind of transitioned to capitalism, and Christianity was replaced by liberalism as the ideological superstructure of the civilization, of Western civilization. So we can say in many ways that the West, I think there are many answers to this question, but you're asking me for a uniquely Jewish answer. I think the uniquely Jewish understanding of why the West has been powerful for the last 2,000 years is because Israel was placed into galut, because Israel went into exile, because Israel was weak. And I think now that Israel's come back to life, now that we're back in our land, now that we're thriving and we're succeeding as a nation in the land of our ancestors, we see the West is becoming much weaker. And I think as Israel becomes much stronger, the West will continue to fall.
Wow, I have many questions to ask here. I will start by asking, so does that mean that Europe, the West, and Israel cannot be both strong at the same time? Because I think it portrays like a very unstable structure of the world. Because if one will be always weak, it will be unstable. So there will be always, as we say in Hebrew, a balagan, a system of instability, right? So
Right.
both cannot be strong at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is the view of our sages. That is the perspective of our prophets and sages, based on Daniel's vision of the four empires. Right, we understand Western civilization to be the fourth empire, the empire of Edom, that is dominant in the world until Israel comes back to life. So, and also, I think that the world is unstable. The world is constantly in motion. The world is dynamic. History is fluid, and there's this dialectical process of history that and we're living through tumultuous times even now, both in our country and abroad. So we see the world is not a stable place. I think we should probably shift from thinking about stability versus instability to thinking about justice versus injustice. And I think Israel came back to life after 2,000 years in order to make the world a better place. I think every time we've had power in history, we've benefited human civilization. And now that we're back again, we should think about how we're meant to benefit human civilization again.
Rabbi Yehuda, we hear many intellectuals talk about a special concoction of Judeo-Christian values that made the West successful. How do you see that? Really, did the West really adopt elements of Judaism? Maybe when, as you just said, when Jews went into the Galut, that made the West so successful?
I think they appropriated certain aspects of our culture and identity. I think there's a way that humanity is meant to receive the Torah from us. And I think what Christianity did was they basically stole it and claimed it to be theirs, misunderstood it, misrepresented it, and actually used it as a tool of oppression for 2,000 years. I think, one of the reasons why the West has been so strong is because they've been dominating weaker peoples in the global South and telling themselves that they're just superior human beings and that they can do so. And it's only in the modern age that people are starting to realize that that was wrong. But most of Western civilization was built on the destruction of other peoples, other civilizations, other cultures. You don't have to. I mean, you can go as far back as our civilization, right? Like the West destroyed us, but not only us. We're the civilization that survived, that lasted 2,000 years in gas form, and then came back to life. But I think this idea of Judeo-Christian civilization is very much a lie that was told to make us feel like we're somehow part of it. We're not. Even if you're going to argue that there's such a thing as a Judeo-Christian civilization or culture or value, I'd argue that focusing on those things, focusing on the things that we share with the West or that the Christians took from us, whether they got those things right or wrong, I'd argue they got them wrong in most cases, but one could say maybe they got some of them right. But even if that's true, I think today, for us to be able to fulfill our role, for Israel to be what we're supposed to be, for us to be what we came back to life to be, in 1948, 1967, we need to shift away from focusing on what we share in common with the West, because the world already has those things. And I think now that we're back in our land, now that we have power again for the first time in 2,000 years, we need to focus on what new we have to share with humanity. And whatever new we have, whatever we can share with humanity today that we didn't already share with them, will not be found in what we share in common. Meaning, what we share in common is what we already gave them. What we have to share now is going to be found in places where we're afraid to look because they ostensibly conflict with the values of Western civilization.
Rabbi Yehuda, there is this view in the Israeli philosophy, one of the views, that Israel should be like a bridge between the East and the West. In philosophical terms, also in geographical terms, because we're located right between the West and the East. How do you see that?
I think that's correct on a very deep level. I think that's correct. I think Israel's meant to be a bridge between civilizations. I think it's very well expressed by our calendar, right? Like in ancient times, the West was really represented by Egypt and the East by Babylon. Babylon had a lunar calendar and Egypt had a solar calendar. Before we left Egypt, we were given a calendar that was both. It was lunar and solar. Our calendar, the calendar we use until today, is both lunar and solar, expressing that we're a bridge between civilizations. But it's important for us to know it's not equally lunar and solar. It's lunar with some solar adjustments. Just like our country is not geographically between the East and the West, our country is in West Asia. We're in what some refer to as the Middle East. That might be a problematic term. We can say the Semitic region or West Asia. We're not in the West, but I think that today, if we're going to serve our role as a bridge between civilizations, we need more balance. I think, unfortunately, today, most of the Jewish world and certainly Israel's elites want to see Israel as part of the West and try to play down the aspects of our identity and culture that we share in common with our neighbors here in the Semitic region. And I think, just like the Rambam teaches, that when one has a character trait that's unbalanced, they need to kind of go a little bit further in the other direction in order to eventually arrive at a healthy middle. So I think today, because Israel might, or Israel's ruling class might overemphasize the aspects of our identity that we share in common with the West and try to play down what we share in common with our neighbors, I think that that we need to kind of go a little bit in the opposite direction, at least temporarily, in order to get ourselves to a healthy middle. And I think that would also be very helpful in terms of resolving some of our conflicts in the region. I think that many of our neighbors perceive Israel to be an outpost of Western civilization, a settler colony, an appendage of American power in the region. And I think it's important that we communicate to our neighbors, not just in our words, but in our actions, and in our self-definitions, that we're not that we're not here to be, as Ehud Barak said, a villa in the jungle, an outpost of Western civilization in an otherwise quote-unquote savage region, but rather we should, part of our coming back to life, part of our coming back to our land is, re-indigenizing into the region and actually becoming an organic part of the region, at peace with our neighbors, but of course as a bridge, like you said, between this civilization that exists here in West Asia and other civilizations, including the West.
But you think philosophically that Israel is a much more Eastern civilization than Western, am I correct?
I think we are, but I think, look, we've suffered many, many centuries of traumatic persecution, especially Ashkenazi Jews who were in the West, who were in Europe. And I think those many layers of traumatic persecution caused us to want inclusion in those societies. In France, in Germany, in the United States, it was a Jewish goal. It became a Jewish goal in these places to assimilate into the society, ideally while maintaining our identity, but becoming part of the society by being accepted, by being granted inclusion, by being granted whiteness in these places. And I think that we need to be understanding of the fact that desire for inclusion, that desire for whiteness, that desire to be seen by the West as part of the West is actually part of our oppression. It directly stems from the fact that we suffered so terribly for so long as a result of being other in those societies, that we, especially Ashkenazi Jews, developed this desire to be accepted in Western society. And I think that's kind of transferred to the state of Israel and Israel's leadership on the international stage. I think in many ways, Israel's leadership, which traditionally has been mostly an Ashkenazi leadership, has brought this mentality of wanting to be part of the West and to fit in with the West, to the national stage and then to international politics. And I think that's one of the reasons we really need, we've achieved tremendous success materially. We've been liberated, 1948, we forced the British to leave our land and we declared independence. And then in 1967, we liberated Jerusalem and Yehuda v'Shomron and Gaza and the Golan and Sinai. And we might not have all of that today, but maybe B'ezrat Hashem one day we'll go back. But in the meantime, we have to understand that we've never healed. Our psychological liberation is still lacking, and we need to catch up psychologically to what we've achieved materially as a nation. We need to unpack what happened to us. We need to address all the trauma we experienced in exile, and we need to undergo a post-colonial process, really, to really address our trauma, what happened to us, heal from it on a national level, talk about what kind of society we're trying to create. I think this was very much a lot of the, at the core of the internal fighting we saw last year here around the issue of judicial reform. It was really a question of what kind of society are we trying to create here? What kind of state are we going to be? What is the Jewish character? What is the democratic character? Is it supposed to be an outpost of the West? Is Israel meant to be like a Rhodesia? Or is Israel meant to be something uniquely Jewish that the world hasn't seen in 2,000 years? And I think that we require this post-colonial conversation on a national level, like all nations that achieve liberation after years of subjugation, but even more so for us, because we weren't just conquered and dominated in our own land, we were really cast into the belly of the beast. We suffered thousands of years in exile, tremendous trauma that we haven't begun to address or heal from. And I think that if we were to begin that process, we would find that we're not actually part of the West. We could be friendly with the West, although, as I said earlier, as Israel becomes stronger, the West will be losing its dominance and is already losing its dominance in the world. I think that's just something our sages make very clear in regards to the prophecy of our ancestress Rivka, and also in terms of how our sages relate to the prophecy of the four empires, right? Edom, Western civilization, is the fourth empire that, as Israel comes back to life, is beginning its historic decline. And I would also argue that, Western civilization was very challenged on a very deep level, challenged by the return of Israel to history. Because for centuries, Christianity is obviously a foundational pillar of Western civilization, but Christianity had been claiming that the proof that Christianity is correct is that the Jewish people are in exile. Meaning this was very much how they justified their existence and their power and their role in the world. And I think, in 1948, the West was able to justify this by saying, you know what? We gave the Jewish people a bomb shelter state because we are good people and we're moral and we felt sorry for the Jews. But that's how they, the West, including President Biden today, chooses to see Israel. Israel is a bomb shelter for persecuted Jews that is protected by the West, that's armed and funded by the Americans, protected by the West, whereas we see ourselves differently. We see ourselves as the children of Israel come back to life after 2,000 years, ideally to leave the world somewhere better.
Rabbi Yehuda, I want to thank you very much for this interview. Thank you very much for connecting and being with us.
Thank you so much. Purim Sameach.
Purim Sameach. I also want to thank all of our viewers that saw this interview. Please don't forget to subscribe to us on all of our social media platforms. Thank you again. Have a great day.